Blake, I'm jealous because you're out in the garden.
Yeah.
That's
no kidding.
You're not faking it with a background there, right?
I'm not faking it. I am out in the garden. I'm in Fantasy Circle, and you will not believe this, but I am looking at Brie Arthur. She is sitting across. She's walking across from Fantasy Circle. She's making a film about camellias. I don't know. That's. Wait, can you see? That's her. She's presently making a film for her channel. I imagine about camellias. I would love for her. Hey, Brie. We're recording the midweek program right now. Yeah, please do. Please come say hi.
Hey, Brie.
This is Tom. Hey, Tom Ranney.
Hey, Brie, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Are you out looking at camellias?
I was. The Professor Sargent is in full bloom, and it looks amazing.
Yeah. Looks like a good day to be out there.
No kidding.
Oh my gosh. Can you believe this?
Right.
Like, this is totally why people move to North Carolina.
Isn't it though?
Yeah.
Seriously, the middle of February. It's warm.
This is so nice. Tom, I'm going to be close to you next week. I'm coming up to do some stuff with Carolina Native Nursery, and I'm going to catch up with Anthony.
Well, you should come see all the camellias blooming in our greenhouse right now.
Okay, I will. I'll send you a message, but I think I have all of Wednesday kind of to do anything. So plans.
All right. Let us know.
Okay, thanks.
Well, great. Thank you so much for this little cameo, Brie.
Well, that's what I always say. The Arboretum just serves as this nexus to connect people,
Absolutely.
Sometimes even during our programming. So
it's the greatest part of Raleigh.
Yeah, absolutely. You heard it here first, y'all.
I'm jealous. This is that y'all are outside because
absolutely
warm and nice as it is. I finally got hit.
Tell Rick Ray I say hi.
Okay.
Hi, Rick Ray. Sorry, I'm seeing the comments.
No worries.
All right, I'm gonna go find Tim.
Great, please do.
Bye, everybody.
Awesome. Well, with that, hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for this midweek program. It is so wonderful to see you all. I am out here in the garden. I'm in Fantasy Circle. It is too beautiful a day to be inside filming this. I feel bad for Mark. He's at home sick, but he's got a nice little presentation prepared for us, which should be wonderful. Today, we're going to be discussing Edgeworthia and Daphne and their relatives, and it is a very pertinent time of year to discuss such a thing as they are blooming now. Okay, and so with that out of the way, I'll kick things over to you, Mark.
Thank you. Appreciate everybody being here. I'm looking, just trying to scan the list, and I'm seeing people joining us from Philadelphia and Tennessee. Hey, Hale, how are you doing? From the West Coast, a bunch of folks from North Carolina. So it looks like we have a really good group. And as always, when I'm talking specifically about zone 7B, 7A, Central North Carolina, Piedmont kind of conditions, but hardiness may vary if you're a little bit farther north or heat tolerance farther south. So just to keep that in mind for everybody. I always tell people that I have a terrible sense of smell. People are always asking me, is that fragrant? Is that fragrant? It's probably after do deer eat it is probably the most asked question. And as I always tell people, I have a terrible sense of smell. So I don't know, is generally the answer to that. However, Daphne, I can tell you, are fragrant, and I can smell them. So that's I'll just start right there. Somebody is saying they don't have video. Does everybody else have video, or is it just me talking? Because right now it should just be me talking.
I sure have video. I can see you just fine, Mark.
Okay. I'm not going to try and troubleshoot. So Daphne's from a really weird group of plants. The family is the Thymelaeaceae, which confuses people because it's spelled Thyme, well, Thyme, Yeah, Thymelaeaceae, I think. I don't know. It's one I always spell wrong. Which is apparently not a very good family in that it's pretty poorly understood evolutionary relationships between plants, and I don't get into that too much because I don't understand that too much. But in general, people look at it's about 50 plus genera in the Thymelaeaceae family, and it comes that Thymelaeaceae it does come from thyme, for the leaves that look like thyme, which when we think about Daphne odora, the main Daphne, it does not look much like thyme, but that wasn't the plant that it was really named for. And then what is it like? Elea is olive. So, and the fruits on some of them are kind of olive-like, especially if you're, no plants from the Middle East. So it's, thyme, olive kind of thing. So the 52 genera, most of them are Southern Hemisphere, South America, a little bit up into Central America, the majority of them in Africa. Australia and Oceania are a lot of them, and then there's some in Asia, some in the in kind of Europe, mostly Mediterranean area, and then only two genera can be found in North America. One is Daphnopsis, which is really Mexican and Central and South America, so not up into the U.S. And then the other one is Dirka, which there are a few species, but the one that's here on the East Coast is Dirka palustris, or leatherwood. So, despite being a big group, the ones we can actually grow is a pretty narrow slice of those. I was just kind of playing around in our database looking for what we've grown, and what the ones we've grown and still grow, the genera Daphne, Edgeworthia, Dirka, and Wickstreamia. We have sown seed of Pimelia, but have not had any grow. That's an Australian and Oceania group. So in general, plants in the group, some of the characteristics are they tend to have this really smooth, kind of shiny bark, very fibrous. Edgeworthia is often called Japanese rice paper plant or Japanese paper plant because the bark can make really nice paper. That's true for a lot of or several of the species anyway. And also the fibers make a very strong rope. And if you ever try and kind of break off pieces, they can be bendy and hard to tear. So use your pruners when you're doing that. The ones we grow usually have berries, a one-seeded berry on them. There are some that have a dry fruit as well, but I've never grown them, so I'm a little less familiar with those. So let's get into some plants. I'm not going to do a PowerPoint for you, but I do have some plants here. This is pretty much the typical Daphne odora. It's in flower for us right now. It's got white flower buds. I don't know if I have still any in bud, or excuse me, pink flower buds that open up pink and then kind of get more white as they age. You see some of the older ones on the outsides turn white. And they're so fragrant. It's that real lemon fragrance, and not like some plants where there's more lemon pledge to me. This is really really sweet, beautiful scent. And like Southern magnolias, this fragrance is one that you can get right up on it and stick your nose in it. It smells great, but it floats on in the air. So it's not something you have to put right by your door to smell it. It'll kind of fill the whole garden with fragrance. It's a plant that I don't think any garden that can grow it should be without. I've heard people saying, "Oh, it dies. It's doesn't live for that long." And people who have had it for a long time in their garden tend to stay quiet because they don't want to jinx their plant. I know at least a couple people who are due to have their Daphne die soon because two people in recent weeks have told me about their decades old Daphne. And that's a sure sign they're going to go downhill. But the truth of the matter is, they're very easy to grow. They want a very well-drained soil, and really they'll grow in shade, but sun to part shade is really better for them. But the well-draining soil is a real must. And so I tell people plant them right up close to trees, deciduous trees. It's a great location. They don't have all those, big trees don't have all their feeder roots right there at the base, but they do tend to suck up excess summer moisture, especially. And they take up, and during the winter when the trees are dormant and these are flowering and going, they get a little bit more moisture. I did see something pop up in the chat about are Daphne good in containers? Daphne are notoriously difficult in container production in nurseries. Nurseries have to put, they water plants on timers and kind of, it's hard to really, monitor each individual plant. So they can be really difficult. And a lot of nurseries don't like them, don't like growing them. But you can grow them in a container as long as you have very well-drained soil and it's not, the container is up off the ground. When you get a container on the ground, you can kind of seal that bottom and they don't really like that. But easy to grow. This is actually a selection called Zuiko-Nishiki, which we originally received many, many, many years ago from John Elsley in South Carolina. And he said, this is the heaviest flowering Daphne available anywhere. And I have to agree, after growing this for years and years, it really is a spectacular plant. And this is the typical form. I will say my favorite, I want to show you some great variegated Daphne and some amazing other plants. One of my absolute all-time favorite plants is the white form of Daphne odora. Now, usually when you get that white form, it's got a white edge to the leaf. I love variegated plants, but I'll tell you, my favorite Daphne is just that plain green leaf one with the pure white flowers, no pink in it at all. And for some reason, nobody seems to produce those. I don't currently have one in my garden, and I want one. But Daphne odora generally get to be, here in the East, 3 to 4 feet by 3 to 4 feet. They can get larger if you've been growing them for a long time and they're in an ideal spot and they don't die. I've seen them as large as 6 by 6. I understand they can get even bigger than that. Never really seen them that large myself. So I mentioned that there are some white and cream edged ones, Ario variegata, Albo marginata. It seems like a lot of them are the same plant with different names just because they tend to emerge kind of creamy yellow and then go white as they age. So it seems like somebody sees it when it first comes out and they call it Ario marginata, gold edged. And then somebody looks at it later and calls it Alba marginata or something like that. But there are some really good variegated ones. One of the best, and now this is, I'm going to test myself here. These are different cultivars. Let me see if I can tell. So this one is Maejima, Maejima. This is one, the cultivar name of Hureb, but goes by Rebecca. And they are virtually identical to me. Perhaps they are identical. The Rebecca seems like it has a slightly barer leaf, perhaps. But whenever I see somebody talking about how wide the variegation is on one versus the other, I'll go out and look at our plants, and depending on the branch you look at, one could be the other that way. But they're coming into flower right now and are incredible. And after that cold snap in December 23rd, there's a little bit of off color on the leaves, but they still look pretty darn good. They both smell great. Those are real showstopper plants. Both of them, kind of are knock your socks off when you see them. A perhaps little more subtle, I don't know if much more subtle, is another pair that are all but identical. And probably are identical, although these we have under two different Japanese names. We have, I have to remember where I took the cuttings from. We have Shinano Nishiki and Nakafu. Nakafu was one I saw decades ago and loved it. I really wanted it and searched for years. And it was, I was saying something to Tony Avent here locally at Juniper Level Botanic Gardens, Plant Delights Nursery. He's like, "Oh, I've got one of those. You can take cuttings on it." Of course, go search around the world, and there it is in the backyard. Shinano Nishiki, I really think these are the same. They both have kind of a green edge, a narrow green edge, and pale green in the center, and then if you get up close, and it's hard to see probably on here, but there's a little bit darker green in the center. So really it's that bottom layer in the tissue of the leaf is green. And so you see that through coming through in the plants. Same flower color. I sure would love to see some of these with that pure white flower as well. I think it just, for some reason, I find, even though the pink is beautiful, especially in bud, I think it shows up, it pops in the landscape a little bit better when it's pure white. But they smell good. There are a few others. These, both of these tend to do a lot of sporting, especially Nakafu. And so there are some other ones that I think probably come off of some of these variegated ones. There's one called Ripple that has a real wavy leaf. There's a one that I think was introduced by a local grower called Wild Winter. That's kind of like the Nakafu, but a little wavier, and the colors are a little bit brighter in kind of their how different they are. But both amazing plants. So Daphne odora, like I said, is a people complain about it being difficult to grow. And they say, "Oh, it'll grow," and then it just dies out of nowhere. And I think that's perfect. That's the perfect plant. I don't like plants that linger around and think about dying for a long time. If they're going to die, let them go ahead and die. I plant them on slopes. I plant them right at the base of trees. And most importantly, I plant them small. Here's Maejima and Nakafu. I plant them small. I hate planting a Daphne much larger than this. I'll go into a 1 gallon, but I don't want a 3-gallon Daphne. They don't settle in well, and they tend to sit in that pot. You've got to really go in there and break up those roots and really get them integrated with the soil if you want them to do well. Otherwise, they tend to, not last very long. And the truth is, if you only keep it alive for 5 years, you've got 5 years of this beautiful evergreen shrub that flowers in the middle of winter, that scents the whole garden, that is beautiful every day of the year for those 5 years it's alive. And then it dies, seemingly overnight, just about. And you paid, if you went and bought one of those 3-gallon ones, you paid maybe $50 for it at a high-end garden center. $50 over 5 years, $10 a year for that. That's a pretty good bargain. And like I said, a lot of people, or some people at least here in the East Coast, keep them alive for, 8, 10, 20 years. They're not too expensive. Everybody goes out and buys flats and flats of petunias and things like that they know are going to die, and spend much more than they do on that Daphne. And in my mind, that Daphne by itself is way better than all those petunias you're buying. So if mine dies, I just go get another one. It's simple as that. So let's stick with some of the other evergreen Daphne. So another group of Daphne that are getting wider use here in the East Coast are Daphne transatlantica, Daphne X transatlantica. They have, this is a hybrid one. As opposed to that kind of perfect dome shape, Daphne transatlantica will tend to grow upright at first, and then it'll keep branching kind of from the base, but it'll eventually fill out into a nice mound. This is one called Jim's Pride, really nice plant. I don't know if I wound up, didn't have any flowers on it. This is a newly planted plant. I've grown some Daphne transatlantica. Eternal Fragrance is one that it bloomed heavily in late winter, early spring, but then it threw out flowers almost all the time. Now, in my mind, get you out of that glare there. In my mind, it isn't terribly fragrant, but it's really nice. There are some variegated forms. There's some like Briggs Moonlight, which is almost entirely gold with just a little bit of green around the edge. And those have been a lot tougher for us to grow. Some of the ones with narrow variegated margins have been okay, but I think the real heavily variegated ones just kind of burn up after a couple of years. They never seem to look quite as good for us as they do farther up in New England or England or the Pacific Northwest. I tend to give these a little bit more sun, although those heavily variegated ones, maybe I'd be better off putting them in some shade. But they're just beautiful, striking plants. A couple of ones that are a little bit less common. This is Daphne tangutica. This is one of the several Asian evergreen ones that are really nice. This is one with pale pink flowers. It's just coming into flower now. Daphne tangutica is a little bit smaller. I think of it more as a 2 to 3 foot by 3 foot. It's one that there's a couple of species that are a little bit confused, and I don't know that I would 100% trust anybody who really didn't know their stuff to know which ones they had. Acutuloba, tangutica, retusa, some of those can be a little bit difficult to tell apart. So far for us, this has been a pretty upright plant, not kind of a little bit loose. Where I've seen it in colder climates, it's much more of a tight bun. Now, speaking of more tight buns, we're talking plants here, nothing else, but is these plants. This is Daphne Susannae Tage Lundell. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. I'm sure it's Tahedel or something. And in Europe, they grow a lot of these little dwarf ones. There are a lot of these little, just little cushion guys. They grow maybe 4 or 6 inches tall and 12 inches wide. Very difficult for us to grow. If you want to grow these, you really need to try and grow them in something like a crevice garden, which is where we've had success with these. We never had really before. Or in a, you can grow them in these are ones you can grow in a container, like you would grow alpine plants. Very free draining container. Preferably one you don't water from the top a lot, and you mulch with some kind of non-organic matter like stone. They'll do much better. And you can get these little dwarf guys. There are a lot of species, a lot of selections. They tend to range from pale pink, although you can get white ones, to really some deep rose pink colors. And when they're flowering, they're just the little cushions are absolutely the most adorable thing. Most of them are not terribly fragrant in my experience, but I don't have that much experience with them. I do remember the first time I really got to know these. I was at a Rock Garden Society meeting in Vancouver, and we visited some gardens, and they were in flower everywhere and really just blew my mind. Very exciting. Boy, I see a lot coming in the chat, so I think I'm going to have a lot of questions when I get to the end. So I don't have time to talk about all of, in depth about all the Daphne. So I'll be really interested in your questions and answering those. But also, I think maybe Arlene has put it in the chat, but if you go on our website and go to our resources tab and go to photographs and just type in Daphne, you will get photos, just probably several hundred photos of different types of Daphne, from ones we grow to ones that we've taken pictures of in other gardens, really around the world. And if you go there, the one I want you to look for, there's a Daphne ericinensis picture in there that I took in the wild in Taiwan of this most incredible variegated Daphne ericinensis, and brought back a piece of it, and we had it rooted, and it died. Oh. Are y'all hearing this? I hope not.
Yes, we're hearing you.
Yeah, we hear you.
Sorry if y'all heard that. Apparently my headphones, I don't know how they're wired, but they also got Bluetooth from spam on my phone.
We only heard your voice.
Okay, good, because it was like I was being called by apparently a modem from 1987. It was exactly what it sounded like, that whistling and whatever. So yeah, go into our photo database. Now I'll go from evergreen to semi-evergreen. This is, after this cold, this is as evergreen as it is. But in a mild winter, this one can stay evergreen. This is Acutiloba, Daphne Acutiloba. And this one has been very upright for us, has narrow leaves. They can grow, maybe 2 inches long and maybe a quarter of that at most wide. Little white flowers. Interestingly for us, this has been the heaviest fruiting one. We hardly ever see Daphne odora fruit for us, but we get some of the other species will, and this one always sets fruit, and they're bright red little berries on there. And some Daphne, one we don't have a lot of success with, but one grown a lot in Europe, Daphne mesoreum, that will get just often get the whole stem will be just coated in these brilliant red berries. And they're very poisonous. Some species more than others, but don't go noshing on the fruits on Daphne, because more than likely you will not feel great after that. So let's see. Here's one cut out of the garden yesterday. I snuck in yesterday evening after everybody was gone and got some things out of the Arboretum. Would you believe that this is a deciduous species? This is Daphne pseudomesarium, and this is one of the funkier plants we grow in the Arboretum. It is 100% summer deciduous. It drops every leaf in summer, and it really seems like it's more day length sensitive than it is temperature dependent. Usually when you have plants that are summer dormant, it's because they grow in very, they grow in areas where there's a wet season and a dry season, and so they go dormant to conserve water. I am not entirely sure that why this one is so dependent on day length, or at least why I assume it is. But it'll go completely deciduous, and you just have these kind of stout Daphne branches sitting there all summer long. We grow it in our lath house in a pretty well-drained mix, and it seems to do fine in there. It's well drained, but it gets irrigated all summer long with overhead irrigation, where we can grow hydrangeas and begonias and things like that. So it's getting a fair amount of summer moisture. And then when the days get short again in the fall, it pops out with just this kind of lime green in the spring. It darkens up over winter, but there's absolutely no damage to this. It's a very cold tolerant species. It comes from high elevations. Zero problems with temperature. And then this time of year, it's just getting started. It has these gold flowers. I don't think the color shows up nearly as well on my screen anyway. Hopefully it does on yours. Shows up better. But they are bright yellow. There's no fragrance, nothing at all, but it's so worth growing because it's so weird how it grows. Ours is quite a few years old, and is maybe 2 feet by 2 feet at most. We've got another selection of it, another form of it from another friend that's in the nursery. So hopefully we can plant these out and get some fruiting on there. It hasn't been too difficult to root. The hard part was figuring out when to root it, because it's either getting ready to flower, or it's in flower, or it has no leaves. But trying to get some branches without flowers on it can be difficult. But some of like the interior branches like this, you can take those and root them kind of anytime it's actively going. Weird little plant, Daphne pseudomesarium. Okay, for us here in the East, after Daphne odora, probably the most widely grown Daphne is a deciduous one, at least here East. And this does not do it justice. Really want to go and look at some photos of this, but this is Daphne ginkwa, the Lilac Daphne. And people tell me this one has fragrance. I don't smell it. Daphne ginkwa tends to be kind of an upright grower. This is one from our nursery, and you can see it's kind of grows upright. But all these little knobs on here are flower buds. It will flower almost like a bottle brush all the way down the stem with these really beautiful, lilac pink flowers. If any of you grow this and know that it is fragrant, put it in the chat, because I can never smell it, but other people have told me it is fragrant. So it is a deciduous plant. It grows a little bit bigger, a little bit faster. 5 or 6 feet by maybe 4 feet, 5 feet wide, kind of loose and open and very upright and twiggy during the winter. Really just in my mind, a beautiful plant. It's early. Like I said, it's just starting now outside, but it'll really do its thing in about a month or so. Really get going. But all these are buds. So it's a great plant for bringing inside as a cut stem. Pretty much any time after it's gone good and dormant, you can cut it and bring it inside and have it in a vase and have it flush out like you would forsythia or willow. I'm seeing not fragrant pop up a little bit, so it's not just me. Okay. Daphne. Before I move on, I've seen a couple things about Daphne on here, about rooting and things like that. So we do all of our Daphne by stem cuttings. They maybe be able to do them by root cuttings, but I tend not to do a lot of plants by root cuttings. So we do them by stem cuttings. I find Daphne odora, if you don't rot them immediately when you take the cuttings and you're rooting them, they root very easily. We tend to do less winter cuttings because we're waiting for them to flower, but we've done winter cuttings. We've done May, June cuttings, actually done some fall cuttings, and they all seem to do pretty well. These were stuck in the fall and, are flowering and are well rooted in. Both of these, actually roots coming out of the bottom on this one a little bit even. So pretty easy that way. We just use a off-the-shelf Hormoden 1 rooting compound for them. The hard part is once you get them rooted and you pot them up into a larger pot, they're real easy to rot out. You always want to go on the dry side with them rather than go too wet with them. Daphne ginkwa, I've never done it from winter cuttings. We typically do those kind of May, June, July cuttings as well. They are quite a bit easier and really grow off very well. This is a 2021 cutting, and it's really has been in this pot a little bit too long. It would have been better if we had bumped it up probably late summer last year and gotten even more growth on it. So pretty easy to do. The other Daphne questions before I go on. Daphne tend to be pretty deer proof. They're like I said, they're deer resistant. They are many of them are poisonous, so tend to be pretty good that way. What is the soil temperature recommendations to root cuttings? We root them in our glass house. That's usually, oh gosh, I don't deal with the temperatures in there, but usually 70 to 80 degrees probably. Probably a little bit warmer during the summer, especially where we're doing the rooting now, but we don't mess about that. How do you move them from the small pot to ground? I take them out of the pot and I stick them in the ground. I don't do a whole lot special to them. If they're really root bound, I'll tear apart the roots a little bit. And really, I find, watering them once or twice, and they're mostly good to go for most of the summer unless it gets super dry. Well, there was a question that I will answer now. I was going to save it to the end, but there's a question about whether some of these might be in an auction or anything. And I would say, yes, they definitely will. And we will have our next auction going. It'll be starting in just maybe a couple weeks from today. A week from today? Help me out. The week of our winter symposium. So I think a week from today or tomorrow. And so look for that if you're interested in some of these. I think they will be in there. We like to get these spread around. Question about any comments about Carol Mackey. Carol Mackey is another one of those transatlantica types. It's been a pretty good one for us as well. We don't currently grow it. We tend to have a little less luck with some of the transatlanticas than some of the other, the Daphne odora. All right, now I'm going to move on into related species. And we were talking about this a little bit beforehand. This is Edgeworthia. I had thought mine were a little bit farther along than this, but they're actually not showing much color. So Edgeworthia is sometimes called Japanese paper plant or paper bush, although I think now you're seeing it more as just Edgeworthia. And they are beautiful shrubs, kind of nice, soft foliage during the summer. And then when they drop their leaves in the fall, they have these really kind of coarse branches, but they're usually perfectly shaped because they almost always will branch in threes wherever they branch, sometimes twos, but they'll branch in threes. So you get this real diverging shape, really beautiful. And then all winter, you'll have these little kind of shimmery white buds hanging from the branches, which are really pretty showy. And when they open up, you get the white outside and these tubes of gold inside. Now, I always hesitate to talk about these because according to all the taxonomists and work, there are a handful of species, but the ones that you'll see around here, the names you'll see growing are Edgeworthia chrysantha and Edgeworthia papyrifera. Now, apparently Edgeworthia papyrifera and Edgeworthia chrysantha are the same thing, and papyrifera is not a valid name. But in horticulture industry, in the nursery industry, you do have two distinct plants with those names. Edgeworthia chrysantha has what is sold as Edgeworthia chrysantha in the US has a larger leaf, 4 to 6 inches long, tends to have stouter branches, and the flower clusters are larger. And when they open up, they tend to turn up a bit and face you. Whereas Edgeworthia papyrifera have much smaller leaves, usually more like 3 to 4 inches and narrower, finer branching, thinner branches. And the smaller flowers tend to be not quite as bright yellow, although that's variable, and will hang down and be a little bit smaller. It just so happens also that Edgeworthia, I'll call them the papyrifera types, don't grow as well for us. They tend to be much more sensitive to our summer moisture, our summer heat than the chrysantha types. On the West Coast, they can grow, in Seattle and places like that, they can grow both of them, no problem. But for us, the Edgeworthia papyrifera ones, the smaller leaf ones, are very difficult. And that's why if you ever see Akabono, which is orangey red flowered one, also sold as red dragon and got a few other names. Those are the papyrifera types, and they tend to not be long for the world when we grow them here. They sell a lot of them, but they don't last long. We've probably killed 2 dozen of those. I've probably killed a half dozen of those at my home. But the chrysantha types do well. Now, for years, we grew a papyrifera type that did grow for us. It came from Don Jacobs in Georgia, Eco Gardens. It was called Eco Yaku. So I'm assuming it was collected on Yakushima Island. We had that one growing next to a typical Edgeworthia chrysantha. So they were side by side. It was great because you could really point out the differences between the two. And we don't get fruit often, but one year we got fruit on the Iko Yaku, the papyrifera type, small leaf, hard to grow one. And we sowed those out, and we selected one that was really superior to the rest. And that's actually what this one is. It's snow globe. So it is very definitely a hybrid between the two, or according to botanists and taxonomists, it's not a hybrid because they're all Edgeworthia chrysantha, but it's between the chrysantha type and the papyrifera type. And it tends to look and grow much like Edgeworthia chrysantha, but it tends to stay a little bit smaller. But the flowers do sit up and are really nice and gold. It's been a great plant. So I think we got some photos in there. We often distribute that one. So there are other species. I've always been told that Edgeworthia Gardneri, which we've grown a little bit here and there, never terribly successfully or never terribly long. I've always been told that's an evergreen species. But every time I've ever seen it in cultivation, it's deciduous. So either it is not the right thing in cultivation when I've seen it, or it's not actually evergreen. And I've never managed to see the other species, Albiflora, Eriosolenoides, or Longipes. So I don't really know a whole lot about those. So I do want to show a few others. I didn't really do a PowerPoint. We've been directing you to our website, and that's actually what I'm going to share with you is some images from our website. And I did want to note, I said that many of these are Southern Hemisphere. This is one called Thymelaeaceae. That's this genus is Australian and kind of Oceania area. And you can see, I mean, that thing's a pretty showy plant right there. I'd love to try it. It probably won't grow for us, but we've never killed it, so it's worth growing. Well, let me go. So another one that I talked about us growing is Wickstromia or Wickstremia. There are, I believe there are some evergreen Wickstremia, but there are also most of them are deciduous. And I'm not sure what the difference is between a Wickstremia and a Daphne, to be honest with you. They seem to be pretty close. We have collected it. We have some at the Arboretum. Most of the ones we have at the Arboretum are what we call bio plants. That's botanical interest only. They're just not that showy of plants. And so the ones I've seen tend to have green to yellow flowers, although the earliest plants that I've seen, the first plants I saw of Wickstremia in cultivation, I am now pretty certain those were actually Daphne pseudomesarium because they were leafing out in the winter and they had really bright gold flowers. And my experience with actual Wickstremia.
You were just buffering pretty hard there. Could you go back maybe 10 or 15 seconds?
Oh, yeah. I was saying, I don't know where I cut out, but I have a hard time telling the difference between Daphne and Wickstremia, although the Wickstremia I've grown are not as showy as most Daphne I've grown. And what I originally learned as Wickstremia, I think was actually that Daphne pseudomesarium because it went summer dormant and it had bright gold winter flowers and winter foliage. So it was the showiest one I've ever seen, and I don't think it was the real thing. This is a picture of that snow globe, that hybrid that we've introduced that we think's a pretty nice plant. And you can see kind of how the flowers sit up and how gold they are right there. It's a beautiful thing. But this is Edgeworthia chrysantha. This was the father of snow globe. This is Edgeworthia papyrifera eco-yaku. So you can see it's much finer where you had these really kind of thick, coarse branches in the winter. These are much finer, and you can tell even from this that the flower heads are much smaller, and they tend to hang down, so you don't get that gold. It's a pretty plant, but in my mind, in terms of wow value, there's no comparison really between the two. There they are a little bit earlier in the season, so even before they open up and start showing that gold, this is all winter long until it flowers. You get those nice big buds, and so they're both nice that way. Finally, I want to wind up with our one native East Coast Thymelaeaceae member, and that's Dirka palustris, or leatherwood. And if you go in our database, you'll find a bunch of pictures that our horticulturist Tim Alderton has taken just in the woods along Crabtree Creek and here locally in the area. And so in the early spring, you see trilliums coming up. Things are starting to come to life. But it can be as early as late February that they'll start flowering. They've got these, nice flowers. They're not showy or anything. Just before we started, Tom Ranney asked about the possibility of grafting Edgeworthia on Dirka palustris, something that they're trying out. And that's really because Edgeworthia, you see how it all branches from the ground. It can sucker. So a lot of times growers will grow these as kind of standards, one stem, and they'll have a foot, 2 foot of no branches, and then this umbrella on top. It's really beautiful that way. But they will sucker. You'll get lots of suckering in there. And even with something like this and burn it to the ground, you can get a lot of little growth in there. Now, we tend to cut those out and root those. But if you're producing this in rate of production, it might be interesting to grow it on to graft it on Dirka, which does not sucker. It also potentially Dirka palustris can tolerate quite a bit more water around its roots, so it may make it a little bit more resistant to rotting if it's a really wet season. And also Dirka grows from, I think, Canada all the way down to Georgia or Florida. So potentially adding in some hardiness as well, although I don't know if it would do much of that. But really interesting kind of experiment to see if how that might work. So I will answer some questions. I don't know. Blake, help me out a little bit if there are things from earlier on.
So I've yet to see any questions about Edgeworthia. Somebody did ask with regards to Daphne, will they grow in California near Sacramento where it's dry, but they can irrigate?
I don't know. If you can grow other kind of Asian, Eastern North American type plants, probably, but I would really recommend, there's so many things around Sacramento you can grow that we can't put in things that don't need a lot of irrigation. It's just, y'all are running out of water out there. I don't know if Sacramento is, but boy, a lot of the West is. So I would suggest growing things that are going to be more adaptable to the area. Some of the ones that might be good. There are some of these that come from Mediterranean and especially some of these little buns, these little dwarf ones that, gosh, they would do great out there, I would imagine, as long as you get cold. I don't know if Sacramento gets cold, so maybe scratch that. but those be interesting. You can grow Australian plants. You could look into getting some of these Thymelaeaceae and other Daphne relatives. That could be really cool.
Okay. Kate here is asking, how will Edgeworthia accept transplantation? Can you move it?
Yeah, it can always be tricky with Daphne and Edgeworthia on moving them. They're not as forgiving as, say, an azalea or something like that, or a holly. But we do move them, pretty readily. We'll go in. We won't cut them to the ground, but we'll often cut out most of the older, bigger branches, and in part that's to make it easier to maneuver. I found when we do move them, we don't need to dig a terribly big root ball. They don't tend to be terribly well rooted anyway. Going to be kind of some larger roots, but not a whole lot of fibrous roots and things like that. So when you move them, you're probably not going to have a lot of roots to get back in the ground. So when you plant it, it's real important that you water it really heavily. And I always recommend with these to fill the hole back in halfway with the roots and water it in, really soak it, and then put more on top and water it in, and that'll help lock it in place. But then when I move them, I'll often, because there's not a lot of root there, and they'll tend to, if you get wind, they'll blow, or they're just top heavy and they go over. Make kind of a tripod with bamboo or some kind of stakes and put that over it, kind of going through the branches, and tie it up on top so that it's just kind of locked in a little cage. I don't try and do an individual stake and tie it, but to just kind of put something over it so it can't move around a lot and get it to root in. And then just water it as needed. I tend to stay on the dry side, but part of that's because I'm lazy and don't like to water a whole lot, but I find they settle in. They settle in well, or they die quick. Again, that's perfect for me. Live or die, just don't dither around about it.
Sure, fair enough. Marilyn's saying that she gets pretty good fall color on her Edgeworthia some years, but other years there's not really much fall color. Can you have any idea why there's so much variability there?
Yeah, so fall color, when you get it, will be usually a nice buttery yellow. It's the kind of thing that, if you're looking at sugar maples and Fothergilla and things like that have really intense colors, you might not notice, but in kind of a woodland setting, that kind of thing, it really can be really quite beautiful. I think I'll go back to the clear days and cool nights give you the best fall color in general. So that may be it, but I've never really paid enough attention to when I get good fall color. But I agree, it's not every year that we get good fall color on them.
Hey, Mark, it's Suzanne Edney. Yeah. I just wanted to make a comment. When I was learning landscaping and plants, someone gave me all their old Sunset magazines. This was back in the 1980s. And they had a terrible drought out there. I'm not sure where Sunset is, but the Daphne odora won the prize for drought tolerance.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's like I tell people, just plant it, water it in and walk away.
Yeah, and that's really what I do. Almost all of my plants, if I can plant them at this size, and if I were to plant this, I'd probably twist off the flowers this first year, so it didn't spend energy on those. But I'll plant that and I'll water it in, and I will pretty much not water it again. I may, if things get really hot, I may throw a sprinkler out to kind of hit a whole garden area. But especially if I plant it now, I won't. And in fact, need to make sure I tell the staff to take a couple of plants out of our nursery inventory, because I don't see any reason for lugging these back to the Arboretum. So these will go in my garden. That's exactly what I'll do. And I'll do it, this afternoon or tomorrow and water it and then walk away. There was somebody I saw that said they have an Edgeworthia about 3 feet by 3 feet, and it's too close to a spirea and will it accept being moved? Move the spirea. They'll move, no problem. That's easy. And they've got nice fibrous roots, so it'll all hold together. That would be my suggestion. Move the spirea. Should you cut those suckers off your Edgeworthia? I do because it looks better, but you don't have to. Although at some point it'll just get so dense it gets a little ugly. And do it whenever you want. We do it in winter because they're easier to see and get at, and they'll root in winter just as well as in the summer. So, do Daphne need lime if we have pretty acidic soil? I've never limed Daphne. Somebody says their Edgeworthia is getting a type of fungus, and they have to go in to clean all the leaves off the base. What can you give me a little bit more? Looks like Susan Barrier about what does that fungus look like? Maybe she'll type that in. I'm not sure about that. My guess, the ground turns white. That it seems weird that that's coming from your Edgeworthia. So I don't know. I can't answer that. Ovidia andina. Do we grow Ovidia andina? No, I don't know it, but grow it at Arboretum. I won't even try and say the name of the Arboretum. I'm sorry, but Belgian. No, but I'd like to. I'm going to have to try and search that out. We may, if it'll grow for you, we may have issues with it needing cold, but if it's cold hardy for you and it'll take heat, that may be a great plant for us. I don't know anything about it, and now I'm itching to go look it up. Interesting that Daphne tangutica is the better species for you. Interestingly, if you talk about Daphne in the UK, Daphne, the Daphne Bula, I don't know how to pronounce it. I've never actually heard somebody say it. Is what is always talked about as the Daphne there. And it can grow into a large, large plant. And that's another one we've killed over and over. And it really seems as ubiquitous as it is in the UK, we should be able to grow it even with our heat, but I've never had luck with it.
All right, let's do one more question to wrap this up, Mark. The last question will be, where's the best place to put an Edgeworthia?
Oh, the best place to put an Edgeworthia? Right out in front of your house. We grow it in sun. We grow it in shade. It seems to be pretty easy anywhere in my experience. It doesn't do that Daphne die off like very often, but it can on occasion. I always say that it's just changing a bit because Edgeworthia is getting to be a popular enough plant that nurserymen are growing it. But I always used to say that that was the horticultural shibboleth. If you passed somebody's house or went to visit them and they had an Edgeworthia out, you're like, okay, this person gets it. They know a bit about plants here if they're growing an Edgeworthia. Luckily, it's getting beyond that, and other people are discovering it and growing it. But yeah, it's even plant snobs who turn their noses up at common things. I think no matter how common and widely grown Edgeworthia becomes, that people will be turning their nose up at it because it's such a great plant.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for doing this presentation for us. I love how you forewent the PowerPoint presentation and just had real plants that you just held up for us. I love that. I was not expecting that, and I'm so grateful that you did that for us.
Yes, it was all intentional. Had nothing to do with me not getting a PowerPoint done in time.
No kidding. We'll go with that. Absolutely. And thank you everybody for joining us today. We had quite a big crowd and I appreciate that. I hope y'all will join us next week for our midweek program. We're going to be doing an auction preview for the auction affiliated with our winter symposium. So if all of y'all want to, maybe see some plants that you're going to get for next week, you'll get to see all about them. And yes. Okay. So
and to say that for those of you who are joining us from other areas, we do ship small size plants from our auction, continental US.
Great. So there will surely be some Daphnes in the mix, I should hope, and they will be small. So y'all can get your hands on some then. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see y'all next time. Take care.